something as extended as it does, I would truly struggle.
All right, well, you will have complete admiration for Richard Usher, who's the event director and a fantastic athlete in his own right. He's a 5-time winner of this event. He's a former Olympic skier, former New Zealand triathlon record holder. Richard, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Jim.
And you're well underway, aren't you?
We are well underway. We're actually almost, getting pretty close to wrapping up the 2-day event, the first day of the 2-day event at the halfway stage in Klondike Corner. So there's still a few athletes out on course, but they've had a pretty good day out there today, and tomorrow the big show with the 1-day race starts.
Yeah, the big one. Any drama so far?
There's always a few little dramas. I mean, just the terrain that they're covering, especially in the mountain run. So we had a broken leg in there today. Someone sort of fell a bit awkwardly, but generally not too many problems. Everyone's been being sensible and looking after each other. So fingers crossed that continues tomorrow.
Is the coast to coast supported as well as it once was? Because of course it's been around for so long, people get used to it.
Yeah, the coast has been it's been around for this is the 34th year of it being around, so it's older than Ironman, and the race had been going through a bit of a decline, and it was sold by the original sort of founder and race director Robin Judkins in 2014. And in 2015, I stopped racing and became the race director for Trojan, who own it. And our whole, I guess, mandate is to try and reinvigorate the race and evolve it so that it does stay current for today's market and for the markets in the future.
And that's reflected in the entries you've got. You're happy enough?
Yes, I mean we've managed to when we first took it over, we were just over 500 entries, and this year we're just over 700 entries.
Okay, that sounds healthy.
We're definitely seeing a resurgence there, and the event feels full again. And we've also had that we've been through. Spates was the sponsor for so many years, and that finished after the 2015 event.
Yeah.
And then this year we have Kathmandu coming on board, and it's just they've brought a huge amount of energy to the race as well. And I think it's just really the building platform that we need to really get it humming again.
Okay. The level of grit this requires, we were talking about this before you came on. Do you acquire that level of grit? Do you build yourself into being a supreme athlete? Are you born that way? What is it?
Maybe some people are slightly maybe wired a little bit more that way from birth, but it definitely takes a fair amount of training and also sort of experience to know what where your limits are and how close to that red line you can push. But it's not. There's two very distinct sort of races at the coast to coast. So we've got the elite guys in the 1-day field where you've actually got to be pretty quick just to make the cut-offs because we have to have everyone off the river before dark. Yeah. So that's is a really quite a big sort of physical and mental undertaking.
I've got to go, Richard. But good luck. Well done on the Coast to Coast organisation. Good luck for the big day tomorrow, Richard Usher. I can see you were looking envious at that level of physical commitment required.
I'm in awe and just tired listening to it.
Bernard Hickey has been on the panel with Golden As Bassam Tabar. Thank you both.
Cheers.
So good to be here.
Enjoy the weekend, everybody, and we're back on Monday. Coming right up is Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Kia ora everyone, tonight on Checkpoint, desperation at Farewell Spit after more than 500 pilot whales became stranded overnight. Of course, at least 300 whales are dead, 50 have become re-stranded. We're going to go there throughout the program. We will have the latest and we'll hear from rescuers and volunteers, plus a scientist about what might be causing this to happen. Also tonight, a federal appeals court refuses to reinstate President Donald Trump's immigration ban. Having lost in court for a second time, he says, see you in court. Sydney prepares for a catastrophic heat wave, and Wynne spends 40 grand accommodating a Whangarei family in a motel. All of that and much more coming up. But first, the Friday Night Pips.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good evening, ko Katrina Batanaho. Efforts to save about 80 whales that remain stranded at Farewell Spit are winding down for the day. More than 500 people turned out to help with the country's third largest stranding since the 1800s. Here's Tracy Neal at the scene.
There were tears and desperation today as families, tourists and professional rescue staff tried to help the remaining whales stranded by the low tide and dying on the sand. The whales are among more than 400 that stranded early today and were refloated but stranded again. A Department of Conservation Operations Manager, Andrew Lamison, says the whales will be kept comfortable until darkness falls. Efforts to refloat them will resume in the morning. At Farewell Spit, Tracy Neal.
The US President Donald Trump has reacted swiftly on Twitter to a decision by an appeals court to keep his controversial travel ban on people from 7 mainly Muslim countries on hold. He's tweeted, "See you in court. The security of our nation is at stake." The ABC's Laura Hyams has more on the court's decision.
The ban was set in place by executive order signed by Donald Trump in the first few days of his presidency. It was challenged on the grounds it was unconstitutional. The US Federal Appeals Court has ruled it should remain in place until a full review can be made on its legality. Justice Department lawyers argue the president had the power to restrict entry to the United States and that the courts could not second-guess the decision. However, the states of Minnesota and Washington argued Mr. Trump's travel ban harmed individuals, businesses and universities, and the ban unconstitutionally blocked entry to people based on religion.
Laura Hyams. A whangarei family has been living in a motel for more than 6 months, costing the government nearly $40,000 because they can't get a house. Janie Davis and her 6 children are a high priority on the Housing New Zealand waitlist, but the agency hasn't been able to find them a home. Ms Davis says she's applied without success for more private rental properties than she can count in the past 6 months. Work and Income has been forced to pay $1,610 a week for her family to live at the Carmel Motel. Checkpoint visited the Carmel Motel today, and you can hear more on this story after the news. The cruise ship Emerald Princess is expected to leave Dunedin this evening after one of its crew members was killed in an explosion yesterday. The Filipino man, understood to be a young father, was killed when a cylinder containing compressed nitrogen hit him before it flew over the railings on the wharf, onto the wharf at Port Chalmers. Accident investigators on board the ship haven't been able to confirm how long their investigation might take, but a Port Otago spokesman says the ship is expected to leave at 6 p.m. at the earliest. The spokesman for the cruise ship company Carnival Australia says passengers are being given on-board counselling. The ship will go straight to its final destination in Sydney after leaving Dunedin instead of heading to Milford Sound. In another incident, a cruise liner is adrift in Bass Strait between the Australian mainland and Tasmania. The vessel is the cruise ship Norwegian Star, which often plies the New Zealand-Australian cruise circuit. It can carry up to 2,348 passengers. Tugs are racing to the scene of the incident. The cause is not known and details are still sketchy. Workers providing relief care for people supporting an elderly or disabled person are not employed by the health authorities, the Supreme Court has been told. In March 2015, the Employment Court ruled in favour of Janet Lowe's case for increased pay, but that decision was overturned by the Court of Appeal. Here's our court reporter Anne-Marie May.
Throughout her 25 years working as a relief carer, Janet Lowe has been paid just $3 an hour. However, health authorities claim that payment was an allowance, not a wage, and at one hearing she and her colleagues were referred to as volunteers. The Crown's lawyer repeated today that there is no relationship between relief workers and those funding the service, only between the relievers and the person they're standing in for. The Supreme Court has reserved its decision. This is Anne-Marie May.
It's 4.5 minutes past 5. To sport, and there's mixed feelings in the Blues camp over the return of All Blacks lock Patrick Tuipulotu to the Super Rugby franchise. While his teammates are pleased he's been cleared of drug allegations, they're concerned about the impact that'll have on them when Tuipulotu hits the tackle bags at training. Tuipulotu was provisionally suspended in November after returning a positive test for a banned substance while on the All Blacks end-of-year tour. But yesterday it was revealed his B sample was clean, clearing him of any wrongdoing. During his suspension, Tuipulotu was unable to train with the Blues, and with the Super Rugby season set to kick off in a couple of weeks, coach Tana Umanga says he has some catching up to do.
Get Patrick up to speed. Everyone's a bit scared about facing him in the next couple of days because he'll have to get up to speed contact-wise. So everyone's drawing names out of a hat to see who gets that job.
Blues coach Tana Umanga. The Breakers' hopes of making the ANBL basketball playoffs hang in the balance as they prepare to play Melbourne tonight in Auckland. Cairns' win over Adelaide yesterday hasn't helped the Breakers' cause, and there's concern over whether veteran Mika Vikona will be fit to play tonight as he's been ill this week. The 7th-placed Breakers must win their final regular season game tonight and hope that other results go their way if they're to break into the top 4 final spots. The 5-time Olympic medalist Australian swimmer Emily Seebohm will compete at the New Zealand Zonal Champs in Auckland this weekend. It'll be her first competitive swim since the Rio Games. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a mixtape from Tigalau Nass, the man behind the band Unity Pacific. In the run-up to Auckland's Pride Festival, we speak with Rainbow Youth about helping young folk come to terms with their sexuality, whatever that turns out to be. We've got the Hipstomatics recorded live at the Auckland Power Station, and because a full one is due this weekend, we have a Sonic Tonic dedicated to songs and sound bites about the moon, so you can howl along to Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather now through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Whanganui, including Bay of Plenty and the central high country. Mainly fine, but some cloudy periods and isolated afternoon and evening showers today. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine and cloudy periods, a few showers at times, especially inland. Manawatu to Wellington, also wide at upper, fine with variable high cloud. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine with high cloud, but a few spots of rain today. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, mostly cloudy, occasional rain or showers clearing from Bulla and northern Westland tonight. Otago and Southland, cloudy periods today with a few showers, mainly fine tomorrow, and the Chatham Islands, cloud increasing today, rain and southerly gales tomorrow. It's 5:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Katrina Batten.
Excuse me, shh. Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday dear John, happy birthday to you.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
That was very nicely sung, Katrina Batten. I'm older but no wiser, as Ian Weddy once said.
Yes, well, aren't we all?
Thanks, Katrina, that's lovely. It's coming up to 5:08. I think it's the first time anyone's ever sung to me on the wireless. So it's very nice. Coming up on Checkpoint, Donald Trump says, "See you in court," in capital letters, having just lost in court comprehensively. The new normal is still very strange in Washington. We'll go there next, but we begin at the northernmost point of the South Island, Farewell Spit. We're going to go there throughout the program tonight as the tide starts to come in. As you know, rescuers have spent the day there trying to save as many whales as they can from a mass stranding of more than 400 of them. If you're joining us on Facebook Live or Freeview Channel 50, you'll be able to see this. It's the Department of Conservation facing a major setback, really, as at least 50 refloated whales found themselves travelling in the wrong direction and have re-stranded themselves on the beach. Authorities were alerted that the pod might be in trouble around 8 o'clock last night, but by first light the beach was lined with carcasses. More than 75% of the whales were dead by the time rescuers arrived on site in any numbers. As time moved on, hundreds of volunteers braved windy conditions to tip buckets of water over the surviving whales in a bid to hydrate them as they all waited for high tide. Shawnee Young was one of the rescuers, hitching a ride with a stranger to make the trek from Nelson to Farewell Spit.
This lovely lady brought me over today, and we just had to come to see what we could do to help. It happens every year, they come in and we lose hundreds. So like we just pick them up and take them out. You know, we need better ways of helping them and saving them. Get them back out where they need to be.
Today's stranding marks the third largest measured whale stranding in New Zealand since the 1800s. 1,000 whales were stranded on the Chatham Islands in 1918 and 450 in Auckland in 1985. In February 2012, 70 pilot whales stranded on Farewell Spit, but they were successfully refloated. Later in the program, we're going to talk to a scientist about what's going on exactly. They're trying really hard to learn that. But first, Cindy Mosey is just one of the 500 volunteers who heeded a call from the Department of Conservation and Project Jonah to go and help. She made the 2-hour drive from Nelson with her 2 children, and I asked her what it was like to be there.
Oh, it's pretty disheartening being here. It's an incredibly sad sight. There's probably 300 dead whales and another 100 that we're trying to save, and maybe another 80 out at sea. But people are quite positive. They're pouring water over the whales. People are cuddling them and talking to them and digging out their flippers. It's a sad time, but we're hoping that we'll get them off tonight, the ones that are still alive.
When's your next high tide? When is your next best chance of getting them out?
I don't think until about 8 tonight, and of course it gets dark about 9:30, and they don't want anybody in the water after it's dark. It's a tough call, really. If it was up to me, I'd throw everyone in there anyway. Humans can look after themselves, but yeah.
I'm looking at the shot that you are coming into us on, and over your left shoulder I can see a river, really, of whales and of people pouring water over them and comforting them and being with them, stretching as far back as I can see behind you. It's an incredible scene.
It is. I think this is probably one of the worst strandings that we've had here. It's been amazing that there's so many people here, but it'd be nice to have more, and definitely some more funding. Maybe helicopters to lift them out would be good. Diggers, I don't know. It's a wee bit helpless. They're such amazing creatures, and you look into their eye and you really feel it goes through to your heart.
Where have you come from, Cindy?
Through from Nelson with 2 children.
And so, have you been to a stranding before?
Been to a stranding once before, and we've swum with the whales a few times up in the island, so it's really they're dear to our heart.
It brings out the best in people, doesn't it? People come from far and wide to help, and Farewell Spit is a long way from anywhere, and there's a huge number of people behind you.
There are. There's probably, I don't know, but maybe 400 or 500 people here now. Could even be more. There's small children, maybe 1, 2, 3-year-olds, right up to people in their 70s.
And we're looking at the shot. There are a lot of dead whales on the beach, Cindy, which must be very distressing, especially for the children, I suspect.
Yeah, I think it's really distressing for everybody. That of course we all want to get the whales off, and everyone's doing their best, but it is really, really sad.
And there's one right beside you. Gosh, you're about 2 metres away from one. Do you know what you're dealing with when you're with them? Do you know whether they're male or female, what age they are? Is there enough information there to tell you that stuff?
No, we don't know that sort of thing, but Project Jonah and DOC are working together, and they've got a big tent set up further down the beach, and they are doing briefings every hour and a half to tell people what to do, how to comfort them, and that sort of thing. But we don't know their age or whether they're male or female.
And you will stay there, I guess, till high tide tonight to try and get them out. And then once it's dark and you're not allowed in the water any longer, what will you stay on?
Well, I've got a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old here, so I can't imagine we'll be out that late. And we've got to get back to Nelson, and I think people will be here all tomorrow. It'll be another day. These whales, I think, will come in tonight, and we'll need refloating again tomorrow.
So if that happens, obviously the more people who can go there and helpfully do the kind of work that all the people around you are doing and you have been doing, I guess the better, really.
Definitely, especially if people have got really warm wetsuits, pillowcases, booties, that sort of thing. If they come with buckets, it really helps.
Cindy Mosey, I was talking to her a short time ago. Project Jonah is coordinating the response, organising the volunteers like Cindy, providing instruction and safety briefings. In fact, you heard Cindy say that. Its General Manager, Darren Grover, joins us now live from Farewell Spit. Darren, you've just come to the phone and we really appreciate it. What is the latest there?
Hi, John. The latest here is that, we're attending to these whales. They're halfway between the high tide and low tide mark. We've got approximately 60 whales that members of the public are working around, and we're monitoring a pod further offshore of another 50 of these whales.
Are they refloated whales, or is that a whole new pod that's heading towards shore?
We believe they are part of this original pod that stranded overnight.
Wow, so how many have been lost, roughly?
Oh, look, the original number, 416. We believe 75% of those have perished. So we're looking at just over 100 live whales that we're working with today.
Gosh, Darren, how long have you been with Project Jonah for?
I've been with Project Jonah now for 5 years.
Okay, have you ever seen anything like this before? Has anyone with the organisation seen anything this big before?
In the early 80s, there were 400 that stranded on Great Barrier Island, but this is the largest number in recorded history on mainland New Zealand.
Yeah, later we're going to talk to a scientist about what causes it. Have you any sense at all at Project Jonah of why they come in such large numbers, imperiling themselves, obviously?
Oh, look, the cliche thing to say here is if you were to build a whale trap, you would build fair whale spit. The pilot whales are particularly susceptible to stranding here. We know that they pass through the Cook Strait every year. Where they're coming from and where they're going to, though, we really don't know. Yeah. So, we really are, we're in the dark with regards to that. But what we do know is, like clockwork, they come through the Cook Strait this time of year every year.
Okay, what can people do? So do you need more help at Fair Whale Spit?
Today we don't. We've still got a couple of hundred people tending to the whales, and we'll be here until last light tonight. Until we assess the situation at about 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, we'll know more then. So if people can, we'll be informing our trained medics, and then we'll be putting something on our Facebook page to let people know whether more help is required at that point.
Project Jonah's Facebook page. You talked before about a pod that was offshore looking potentially to be coming back. How do you run interference, particularly if there is something, whether there are distress signals or something from the whales in the shallows calling them in? Are you able to kind of set up some sort of interference system between them and the shore?
And it's literally a human chain of people. That's the best thing we can do there because people are mobile. At that point, down that low tide, kind of deep into the line, we can position people between them and stranding on the hard sand.
Well, good luck. We all really hope that's successful. Darren, we can hear the odd wind gust. What's the weather like?
Oh, we're overcast now, and out with the whales, there's absolutely no cover, so it's blowing and it's cold. It feels like about 10 degrees out there. So we've got some hardy souls. We're paying close attention to people to make sure they don't exhaust themselves and get into any trouble, because we need healthy people to try and help these healthy whales back into the ocean.
Darren Grover from Project Jonah, good luck doing that work there at Fair Whale Spit, and we will go back to Fair Whale Spit throughout the program tonight, particularly as the tide comes in and they try and get some of the whales back out to sea. Let's go to Washington now with the time at 5:17 on Checkpoint. See you in court, Donald Trump tweeted in capital letters, but his problem was and is that his executive order, now commonly described as his Muslim ban, had just been in court, where in a unanimous decision 3 judges had declined to block an earlier court ruling suspending it. In short, the president put the ban on, a lower court suspended it, the White House appealed and lost. The suspension remains. The ban is not in effect. This is how President Trump responded shortly after the decision came through.
It's a political decision, and we're going to see them in court, and I look forward to doing it.
So you believe the judges made a political decision? We
have a situation where the security of our country is at stake, and it's a very, very serious situation. So we look forward, as I just said, to seeing them in court.
So okay. Do you think this has undercut the early days of your presidency? This is such a core issue.
No, this is just a decision that came down, but we're going to win the case.
And have you conferred with your new Attorney General on this tonight? Is he a part
No,
of
I
it
haven't.
now?
We just heard the decision.
How did you find out about the decision, Mr. President?
Just saw it. We just saw it just like you did.
Via the news, et cetera, the media.
But it's a decision that we'll win, in my opinion, very easily.
Let's go to our correspondent Simon Marks in Washington. Simon, wonderful to have you with us as always. He says they will win very easily at the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court is making determinations on the same rule of law, right?
Yes, absolutely. And the problem is that he keeps losing very easily and is finding it very difficult to win. He said there, as he has said throughout, that this is a national security issue. But the three-judge panel at the Federal Appeals Court specifically made the point in their judgment that the Trump administration has not proved that this is, in fact, a national security issue, in the sense that they haven't presented evidence of a very clear national security threat posed by the people that they want to shut out of the country, namely refugees from all over the world and citizens from those 7 countries that President Trump's executive order targeted. And it's not just the judges in this case who have been saying that. So have former officials with President George W. Bush's administration. Senior figures, including George W. Bush's Attorney General and the legal advisor who wrote the memo for George W. Bush, advising him that the use of torture was legal. So those guys aren't shrinking violent liberals, and they've all made the case that President Trump went about this in a way that did not sufficiently demonstrate the national security case for closing the borders. If he's going to find a way of advancing this legally, he's really going to have to demonstrate that he had a reason for doing it.
Yes, and so far he's failed to do so. It was a unanimous decision by the 3 judges and really comprehensive. I mean, they simply weren't equivocating. His response looked like a strange mixture of petulance and bravado. Is this a blow for him, or does his constituency still believe in him?
Well, it's definitely a blow for him. I mean, a president of the United States, only in his 3rd full week of the presidency, facing such a legal problem and having expressed such public disdain over the last few days for the judiciary. So much so that his own nominee to fill the vacant seat on the Supreme Court, Judge Neil Gorsuch, has had to say that he feels demoralised and disheartened by what the President of the United States has been saying. However, President Trump knows that he looks at polling data that shows that his voters, not the people who have been protesting on the streets, not the people who have been excoriating him in the great pages of the Washington Post and the New York Times, his core supporters in the American heartland still, in large measure, want him to crack down on immigration and deliver law, order and security. So he can be relatively confident that he's still got their support at this very early stage of his presidency. But what he's got to find a way of doing is not just campaigning and making promises, but governing. And what he's learning is that in this constitutional array, it's not one-man government. There's 3 branches of government: the presidency, the Congress and the courts. He seems to be getting very frustrated by the fact that he can't just sit there, sign pieces of paper and make things happen.
Yes, yes. I think he's confusing himself with a rather old-school monarch, isn't he? The question, I guess, is, so you say his supporters still support him. Obviously, the courts are saying, no, you are wrong and you cannot do this. And we have heard, of course, that the protesters, who are principally Democrats, don't like him at all. What about everyone else? What do people who are somewhat bewildered by Donald Trump make of all of this?
Well, I think everybody is still trying to figure out exactly how he is going to settle into the mode of governing. And one of the unsettling things that I think we've witnessed over the last 3 weeks is that he is steadily chipping away, or trying to chip away, in a very deliberate fashion at public confidence in some core institutions here. First of all, public confidence in the courts. He continues to express deep frustration that he even has to be fighting all of this legally. He says it's just common sense. He keeps intimating that he should just be allowed to do it. Secondly, as you know, John, he's chipping away at public confidence in the media. He even argued this week that any poll that shows his approval ratings might be flagging, he simply dismisses as fake news. He doesn't believe it. He tells everybody simply not to believe it. I'm not saying that he's necessarily laying the groundwork for reaching the conclusion that perhaps he needs to tinker with America's constitutional arrangements, but were he ever to get to that point, certainly he's taking actions that he would need to take in order to lay that groundwork. It's very difficult from where we are now to see how he beds down and governs in a way that doesn't leave him continually getting frustrated by the very system of checks and balances that exists here to try and prevent anyone from becoming an authoritarian leader.
That was Simon Marks in Washington. Of course, we will be back in Washington later in the program, 5:24 You're with Checkpoint on a Friday night. Thank you for being with us. Coming up on the program, All Black Patrick Tuipulotu speaks for the first time since being cleared of doping allegations. That B sample was negative, and the Emerald Princess cruise ship remains in Port Chalmers, waiting for investigators to give it the green light to leave after a gas cylinder explosion killed a crew member last night. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You can text us on 2101. You can email checkpoint at radionz.co.nz, and you can tweet us at checkpointrnz. We are, of course, on Facebook, and we are live streaming now on Facebook. If you want to watch us there, you can. We're also on Freeview Channel 50 and the RNZ website. We've talked a lot about the housing crisis facing Auckland on Checkpoint. A great deal of work on this last year. People living in cars, extended families crammed into small houses, and people paying enormous money, actually the taxpayer paying enormous money, to house people in emergency hotel and motel accommodation. Tonight we want to take you 2 and a bit hours north of Auckland to a whangarei motel where 2/3 of the tenants are on the Housing New Zealand waiting list. 2/3 of the tenants in the motel on the Housing New Zealand waiting list. Each room nearly $800 a week, paid for by WINZ, and the owner says most stay for around 2 months, all because there are no homes for them to go to, neither private homes nor state homes. Here is our reporter Zach Fleming with the story.
Janie Davis has been living in a whangarei motel for 6 months because she can't find anywhere else to live. Paid for by Housing New Zealand, the bill is now nearing $40,000.
A number of times where I've even cried myself to sleep. But then I wake up the next day and, oh well, new day, start again.
In the past 20 years, Janie says she's lived in just 2 rentals. She left her previous one in September last year because after 8 years living there, the owner decided to sell up. Since then, she's called 2 rooms at the Kamo Motel home. In that time, Janie's been a high priority on Housing New Zealand's waitlist and says she has applied for more private rentals than she can count.
When I see an empty house, they put a sticker on it with your name and number and But nah, no phone calls from those ones.
Her situation is made difficult because she needs a large home, 4 bedrooms for her and her 6 children aged between 4 and 18, and a home close to her children's school. Her 2 oldest are in 7th form. But Janie is just one example of a larger problem, a severe housing shortage that is now affecting much of the country. At the Kamo Motel, its owner told me 8 of the 12 rooms are occupied by people waiting for a state house, their bill paid for by Housing New Zealand. Janie's friend Debbie, who also spent time in a motel while she was on the Housing New Zealand waitlist, says families of all sizes are struggling to find places to live.
People there that are working, that can't, so it's not just beneficiaries, it's working people as well.
Yeah.
But then you've got families at the motels that have got 2 kids, 1 kid. You know, it doesn't matter how many kids you've got.
Renee Shelford is one of those people. Housing New Zealand pays just under $800 a week for her and her 2 children to stay at the Kamo Motel. She's been there for a month, and like Janie, she has applied for dozens of private rentals.
They can keep paying for the rent and that here, but you know, who wants to live in a motel for the rest of their life with their children?
The Associate Deputy Chief Executive of Social Housing at the Ministry of Social Development, Kay Reid, said in a statement she appreciates Janie's situation is difficult and her options are limited, and until she finds a home, whether private or state, the ministry will continue to ensure Janie's family has somewhere to live. In the meantime, Janie says she is trying to stay hopeful.
I try to have that hope. We just need our own space.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
And we will look at this issue again next week. Cruise ship passengers wandered around Dunedin's Port Chalmers in shock today after a gas cylinder explosion killed a crew member on board the Emerald Princess. The Filipino man who died is understood to be a young father, the crew member. Otago Southern reporter Lydia Anderson has been in Port Chalmers, and Lydia filed this report.
Passengers from the Emerald Princess streamed into Port Chalmers this morning, but despite the crowds, the normally bustling port village was eerily quiet. Sue Wyatt from Sydney said it was difficult to face the reality of what had happened.
Everybody's just in shock, like we're just all walking around looking at each other, and if you talk about it, you start feeling like you want to cry. Yeah. Our cabin boy, he was a friend of a Filipino who lost his life, and he was a dad, and young dad, and he actually, when I spoke to him, he put his arms around me and wanted a hug.
She said passengers had wandered around the ship quietly after Captain William Kent announced there had been an accident.
The captain was so shaken up. He was in such distress. You could tell he had to keep stopping talking to announce it, and just said that there'd been a tragic accident, and kind of explained it and just said for now we just had to sit and wait, and yeah, it was really awful.
Ms Wyatt and her husband Dennis were among about 40 passengers who climbed the hill to Port Chalmers Presbyterian Church today, seeking solace within its walls. The church wasn't open, but Ms Wyatt said cleaners opened its doors and let people inside. The couple said they knew of several people who had witnessed the fatality and had been traumatised by what they saw. Fellow passenger Susan Field from Brisbane said the explosion gave her a huge fright.
I was sitting out on the balcony and I actually thought one of the big containers had fallen, and I dropped to the deck because it sounded enormous bang. Then we looked over the balcony and we saw like a gas bottle projectile go over and hit one of the containers, and missing people that were walking back from the shuttle by mere millimetres.
She said the accident had hit the crew hard.
They're all very young and they all come from overseas countries, so they're away from their family a long time. It's very sad.
Meredith Schmal said she and her friend Diane Bartolot from Virginia wanted to thank Captain Kent for his leadership.
The captain has been so open and updating us, and I know there were some complaints, and it's like he does not deserve that. He's been the consummate professional and just really taking charge of everything.
A spokesman for the cruise ship company Carnival Australia says the company is deeply saddened by the crewman's death. The fatal accident happened during technical work on the hydraulic launching system on a tender vessel or support boat. Passengers are currently on board the Emerald Princess waiting for transport accident investigators to give it the green light to leave Dunedin for its final destination of Sydney. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Lydia Anderson.
Coming up on Checkpoint, Sydney prepares for what's being billed as a catastrophic heatwave, with temperatures this weekend expecting to reach the mid-40s. A mother resorts to social media to find a friend for her daughter with special needs, and a controversial Auckland artwork resembling a state house will be unveiled to the public for the first time this weekend. Nona is coming up with business news, but first Katrina Batten with the RNZ headlines.
Efforts to save about 80 stranded whales at Farewell Spit are winding down for the day. The whales are among more than 400 that stranded early today and were refloated but stranded again. More than 500 people turned out to help the remaining whales. Efforts to refloat them will resume in the morning. A United States appeals court has rejected President Trump's attempt to reinstate his ban on visitors from 7 mainly Muslim countries. The court said it would not block a lower court ruling that halted the order. Mr. Trump responded with an angry tweet saying national security is at risk and there will be a legal challenge. Later, Donald Trump was reported to have told Chinese President Xi Jinping in a phone call that the US administration will respect the One China policy. Mr. Trump's acknowledgement that China has sovereignty over self-ruled Taiwan was unexpected. A whangarei family has been living in a motel for more than 6 months, costing the government nearly $40,000 because they can't get a house. Janie Davis and her 6 children are on the Housing New Zealand waitlist, but the agency hasn't been able to find them a home and has had to pay $1,610 a week for her family to live at the Carmel Motel. The cruise ship Emerald Princess is expected to leave Dunedin this evening after one of its crew members was killed in an explosion yesterday. The Filipino man was killed when a cylinder containing compressed nitrogen hit him. The ship will go straight to its final destination in Sydney after leaving Port Chalmers instead of heading to Milford Sound. Residents in large areas of Australia are being warned to prepare for extreme temperatures over the next 3 days that have the potential, stop looking at me, that have the potential to break records. The country is in the grip of a heat wave with temperatures reaching as high as 47 degrees Celsius in Western New South Wales and warnings of catastrophic fire conditions there and in the ACT and South Australia. Those are the headlines. You'll stop looking at me soon.
Can I look
I'll
at you
be
now?
back at 6. Yes, go ahead.
Thanks so much. That's a visual medium now, Radio New Zealand. We're encouraging people to look at you, Katrina Baden. People are texting in to say what a lovely singing voice you've got.
Oh, thank you.
Anyway, so and as a result of you singing me happy birthday earlier, lots of people are texting in very nice messages. So thank you
Good.
to all concerned. Turning to business news now with Nona Peltier. Hi, Nona. The telecommunications industry pondering some revisions to propose changes to the Telecommunications Act. I have here on my notes in front of me, but I'd rather you talked about that than me.
It sounds a bit complicated, and it kind of is. It's taken a long time to sort through telecommunications lines issues. There's been a bit of a fight about it for many years. You know, the Telecommunications Act was amended. It separated chorus from Spark, as we know.
I remember the unbundling. You know, boy, that goes back to, I think David Cunliffe was the minister then, and Teresa Gatting was CEO of Telecom. You know, this is always contentious and contested over. And
well, there was always the guarantee about, you know, keeping the telephone service so that everyone would have access to a telephone service in rural New Zealand and so on. Well, today, the telecommunications minister, Simon Bridges, released an update on the review that's been going on, indicating that perhaps it may be that protection comes off the copper network.
Right.
So that sparked a reaction, not necessarily from Spark, but certainly it did from the Telecommunication Users Association, which were the strong advocates for that regulation in the get-go. So they're saying, well, okay, it kind of makes sense that you would deregulate in a place where there are other options, so fiber networks, etc., and better services available. Not so much in a rural area, that would still be controlled. But they're still reluctant to back that because, you know, when you start breaking things apart, then, you know, it's a slippery slope, I suppose. And so the telecommunications users are not convinced that that's the way to go.
Is the minister just floating this?
Well, it's in the report, so whether it's being floated or not, it is something that's definitely on the table, right? The chorus, they really didn't say a lot about that, but they did talk a bit about some other issues that have to do with the unbundling of the copper network from regulation, changing that framework, and what that would mean in terms of investment into those high-cost rural areas. What would be the incentive then to bring in those fiber networks into those areas that have copper? Okay, they're protected, but does that mean that there's going to be some orphan parts of New Zealand? Could happen. So let's watch that space. It's not a done deal for sure, but it's a work in progress.
Did you just use the phrase orphan parts?
Orphan.
What a lovely phrase. If you are listening and you think you're in an orphan part, contact us and tell us what you think about all of this.
Yes, I mean, for sure, because you've got till March 1st to contribute something to this review and let the minister know what you think, especially, I suppose, in rural areas. That will be a much bigger issue than for people in the big cities.
Thanks, Nona. How did the markets finish the week?
There's something else you don't know about.
But wait, there's more.
Wait, there's more. I wouldn't call it a birthday surprise, but the Bike Barn, and people might be familiar with that, they sell bikes. They've been fined $800,000 today. The court is one of the largest fines handed down through the Fair Trading Act, and they pleaded guilty to charges, 18 charges related to misleading pricing. And you might wonder, what kind of misleading pricing?
Is that when you go in and there's a sale on everything, but in fact...
That's right. So what happened was the Bike Barn and the companies associated with it, that's the Bike Retail Group, Bikes International Limited, they basically were advertising bikes at a discounted price with, you know, the final days, that kind of thing. But in fact, Those were the regular prices. And a study by the Commerce Commission found that out of nearly 6,000 bike sales, only 30 ever sold at the full price.
Wow.
Yeah. And
800 grand fine.
800,000. Yeah. So anyways.
Well, sorry, the people, okay, so the people who bought bikes from the bike barn believing they were getting bikes on sale that weren't on sale,
right.
Well, that's not addressed.
Well, I don't know if you can take
800 grand should be split amongst them, Nona.
I'm not sure what's going to happen with that. But that's not in my script. I don't know.
Thanks, Nona.
If you have bought a bike at the bike barn, perhaps you can call the Commerce Commission and ask them what that's about. It's got nothing to do with me. Okay. Now, the New Zealand dollar. Okay, well, it ended at 72 cents and 94.1 Australian, and by popular demand, the pence, 57.5 pence. Now, that's a pretty good result for the New Zealand dollar because the U.S. dollar was up high after President Donald Trump talked about some extraordinary tax deals to come corporate way in the next couple of weeks. So we'll see what happens with that. And yeah, oh yes, the New Zealand Top 50 Index fell about 0.25% today. It was down 17 points, 7,104.
Nona Peltz here. Have a wonderful weekend.
Oh, and happy birthday,
Thanks,
John.
Nona. Thank you very much. See you Monday. All Black Patrick Tuipulotu says he is relieved to have been cleared of doping allegations. He's back practising with his super team, the Auckland Blues. He was stood down last year after returning a positive test for a banned substance after the All Blacks Ireland test in November. It was all a bit inexplicable at the time, but he's now been cleared by a second test that came back clear negative and says the past few months have been hard for him and his family. Rowan Quinn reports.
Patrick Tuipulotu says he was shocked when All Blacks management told him he'd received a positive test. He wouldn't comment on what substance the test turned up and says he hasn't been told what went wrong.
Quite happy with the outcome, quite relieved. It's been quite stressful for myself, my partner and my family. Really just looking forward to getting out on that paddock again and training with the Blues and playing.
Tuipulotu told reporters he wasn't worried about the potential for lasting damage to his reputation despite being in the clear.
I'm not one to be in the limelight as much, so I don't look into that too much. I know there's a lot going on in that aspect, but I'm just me, I'll just carry on with what I do.
New Zealand's anti-doping agency Drug Free Sport did not carry out the tests, but its chief executive Graham Steele says two different results are rare. He says the second test would have been taken from the initial blood sample, which is divided into two and frozen in case another test is needed later. Mr Steele says he can't speculate why there might be different results, but it could be as simple as a mistake by the lab. He says there's no doubt, though, that Tuipulotu is in the clear.
From my point of view, the key thing here is that if the B doesn't match the A, then there's no case to answer, and there should be no suspicion or stain on Patrick's reputation.
Tuipulotu's coach, Tana Umanga, says he's not worried about the process and is happy with the final outcome. He says his job is now to help him get back to form after months of training alone.
Everyone's a bit scared about facing him in the next couple of days because he'll have to get up to speed contact-wise. So everyone's drawing names out of a hat to see who gets that job.
Six Nations Rugby, which administered the test, and the World Anti-Doping Agency both say they're investigating the testing process. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
18 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint. Much of Australia is in the grip of a heat wave. In parts, it's a severe heat wave. Temperatures are soaring across South Australia, Victoria, the ACT, New South Wales and southern Queensland. They're forecast to move into the mid-40s in inland areas and high 30s along the coast this weekend. And New South Wales emergency services are preparing for what they fear may be catastrophic bushfire conditions, with the heatwave due to peak on Sunday. This report from the ABC's Thomas Oreti.
If you're relaxing in the comforts of an air-conditioned home, spare a thought for this bloke.
Yesterday I think we got to 45.5 or something, and today 47, and we have a cool change tomorrow, 46.
That's Philip Johnson, a farmer 26 kilometres west of Hay in regional New South Wales. He's been farming in the area since 1974.
I've seen one day, probably going back 15 years, I think we got to 47.5. We've had hot days before, but not a lot of like a run like we've got at the moment.
So what do you do to stay cool?
After yesterday, the poor old air conditioners weren't working real well. So, just have to grin and bear it.
In comparison to Hay, the forecast in the northern New South Wales town of Moree seems mild, with a top of 39. That's expected to climb to 43 tomorrow and 44 on Sunday. But by now, surely they're used to it. Moree's last day below 35 degrees was Boxing Day, easily beating the previous record of 17 consecutive days above 35 degrees, which was set in 1981. Katrina Humphreys is the mayor of the Moree Plains Shire.
There's absolutely nothing we can do about Mother Nature. She rules the world, but we're geared for it. But it's certainly been very tough. It's a big conversation piece, but it was quite exciting yesterday morning because there was a lovely breeze and it was quite pleasant. You know, everybody gets out and does their garden watering and things like that, but come the afternoon, it is foul.
As temperatures soar, there's concern the power supply won't be able to meet the demand, particularly after Wednesday night's blackouts in South Australia. The Australian Energy Market Operator has warned that electricity demand could reach its highest ever in New South Wales early this evening. And these residents of Parramatta in Western Sydney are bracing for a tough night.
I'm worried about that because in the night time it's too hard, isn't it? Because you need the aircon, isn't it?
Well, when I get home, if there's no power, then, you know, you can't turn on the fan, you can't turn on the aircon, so you just gotta open the windows and keep cool as best you can.
Tricia Hitchen is the Deputy Mayor of nearby Penrith, which is often the hottest part of the city.
Council's been working for a number of years on a heat island strategy, trying to cool the city down, you know, greening the city, more water parks, more water, something we do take really seriously.
The City of Sydney is encouraging people to head to libraries, galleries and other public areas to escape the sun. Of course, it's not just New South Wales that's copping the brunt of the heatwave. In South Australia, the mercury's forecast to climb well above 40 in the northern pastoral districts. There's a chance that Canberra could reach one of its hottest days ever, and in parts of Victoria, temperatures are tipped to reach the low to mid-40s. Queenslanders are also in for a tough few days, particularly in the southeast, with a forecast top of 43 degrees on Sunday in the Ipswich region. But with this weather comes the threat of bushfires. And back in New South Wales, the Rural Fire Service is warning of catastrophic weekend fire conditions in areas like the Hunter region due to strong winds and low humidity. Severe fire danger warnings are also expected across more than a third of the state. Shane Fitzsimmons is the RFS Commissioner.
We haven't seen catastrophic fire danger ratings in New South Wales since January of 2013. This is the first time in records that we've seen the catastrophic conditions materialise in a forecast for the likes of the Hunter region, the Tablelands and the Central West.
In the meantime, the advice is simple. Stay inside, drink plenty of water and keep cool. It'll be a few days before some areas escape the heat.
That report from the ABC, 13.5 to 6. The announcement that broadcaster Willie Jackson would stand for Labor was meant to have been a bit of a coup for the party. At least that's how some people saw it, including Andrew Little, of course. And it was a very public but. Not everyone agreed. And when Labor MP Poto Williams publicly criticised him over comments he'd made during the Roastbusters scandal in 2013, what was meant to be points on the board looked a bit of an own goal. Poto Williams and Willie Jackson have since met, and Williams has issued a public statement saying she thinks Jackson gets it or is working to get it. Our Māori issues correspondent Mihi Narangi Forbes spoke to Willie Jackson today about how he thinks his move to Labor has been received.
It's been a good week, believe it or not, and a lot of support out there on the street, particularly from our people from Māori. I'm quite pleased with the first week. Didn't think it would create as much interest as it did, but that's politics.
You met with Poto Williams the other night.
Yeah.
Tell me about that meeting. What was said in there?
Oh, well, it was private between myself and her. I think she's a really good woman. I think she's a passionate woman, principled woman. I just thought that it was good to meet so that we could go over things so she could understand maybe a little bit about me, and I certainly got to understand about her and her background, and so I totally respect Poto and her rights to ask hard questions of me.
What was the one thing that you learnt from her position?
That she's a passionate and principled woman who has got a background in terms of the sexual violence area, and it's something that is very dear to her heart. And I didn't know that. I didn't know Puto's background, and so I respect her very much.
I just wonder, what is it that you've done personally to upskill yourself, to educate yourself or inform yourself since the Roastbusters episode?
Well, we work with families, and I work with families every day. I've done that for a number of years before the unfortunate kōrero that we had with a young lady on Radio Live, and I just have continued with that work every single day.
Do you see now how Poto Williams and others within the party may have felt offended by, the way that you portrayed yourself back then?
It was a conversation 3.5 years ago. I don't think that you can. You should form a view on me just from one conversation. I have over 100 people who work for me. 80% of them are women. I have a board that is 80% women. So some of the critics need to come and see what we do. That's why Poto and I had a good kōrero, and she's going to come out and meet with some of the people.
Do you think that Poto has changed her view on you now?
I think that Poto and I will have a good relationship. We've only had one meeting, and I respect her very much, and so I hope so. I think she might have had different views.
Did you think that was ironic that she asked you for an apology and she ended up having to apologise?
Oh, that's her decision. I never advised Poto to do anything. All I wanted Poto to do is have a kōrero with me, and we did that. And those decisions are her decisions.
Narangi Forbes and Willie Jackson having a kōrero themselves earlier this afternoon. It's 5:09 to 6. A session of South Africa's Parliament descended into chaos as opposition MPs brawled with orderlies after interrupting the President's keynote address. We have some pictures. They are quite remarkable. Deputies from the Economic Freedom Fighters Party fired questions at Jacob Zuma for more than an hour, forcing the President to halt his State of the Nation speech. The President had authorised more than 400 soldiers to join the security team outside the building during the speech, an unprecedented move his opponents described as a militarisation of Parliament. The Speaker ordered the EFF contingent ejected after their leader called President Zuma rotten to the core. Exiting the chamber with his deputies a short time later, opposition Democratic Alliance Party leader Mzumi Maimei said the President was unfit to hold office. President Zuma's speeches in Parliament have led to disruptions, but Thursdays, in which he said the government would push for a greater role for blacks in the economy, was the most violent, with the scuffle spilling over into the precinct of the building. Quite remarkable pictures if you were watching. If not, they're online. Any parents listening will know that whilst you might want your child to be a nuclear physicist or a silver fern or an all black or something fancy like that, it's the simple stuff that really matters most. Happiness, a sense of possibility, friendship. Carlene's daughter, Lily, struggles to have friends. She's 12 but has a mental age of about half that, a big girl and a little girl all at once. She wants to go to the park and ride her bike and play just like any child, but it's hard for Lily to find friends to do that with. And so her mum, Carlene, did an online shout out for playmates for Lily. Nothing fancy, just some friends.
I just went on to a website called Neighbourly, and I just put a listing ad for looking for friends and a group for special needs kids, because she doesn't have very many friends and that, and she was really upset one weekend, and I just thought, I'll just give it a go. Give it a shot and see what happens, and and got a good result out of it.
It's funny, I'm speaking as a dad here. All you really want is for your kids to have mates, isn't it? That's it.
Right, yeah, and she's fine, exactly. But she's fine during the week. It's just in the weekend she just gets really bored easily. So I've got to try and keep it entertained.
So what sort of response did you get?
I've heard about a few, quite a few mums and that. So I got a really good response. So, so she's happy and she's looking forward to meeting her new friends.
Yeah, that's very exciting. So, so does Lily want to play with 12-year-olds because that's her age, Or does
she would love to. She would love to play with some 12-year-olds and some, obviously younger, but they don't want to play with her because as she, has a learning disability, they would rather play with ones that are, normal. So, yeah.
So the 12-year-olds don't want to play with her because her mental age is roughly that of a 5-year-old, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And the 5-year-olds are a bit scared of playing with her because she's a big girl.
Yeah, well, pretty much, yeah. They would rather, that's right. So we're in limbo sometimes.
Is it tough raising a special needs kid? Is this sort of thing? I mean, this is a big conversation, but is this sort of thing commonplace? Do you have to put up with this all the time? The sense that your daughter is different, the sense that she is precluded from a normal life.
Yes, that's correct. It is tough to bring up a special needs child. It's not as like bringing up a normal child. It's totally different. They depend on you a lot more, and you've got to be there for them, and yeah.
And without meaning to be, are people sometimes a little bit careless?
You mean judgmental? Is what you mean, or
yeah?
Or yeah, well, yeah. Everyone looks at you different, especially when you're out in the supermarket or something. And if your child performs or whatever, they look at you differently.
And so, as a
parent, evils and that, so
you get the evils, do you?
Yeah, sometimes. So I just walk out of the shop or whatever, and just walk away.
And is Lily aware of this?
She doesn't understand. So yeah, as a mum, you look out for that kind of thing, but she doesn't understand.
Man, that must be exhausting, is it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so actually all you want is just some normal stuff.
Yeah, exactly, and Lily to have some friends. That's all I want. and for her to be happy.
And has Lily met any new friends as a result of this?
Not yet, but we've got a play date booked for this weekend.
What are you going to do?
We're going to go to the park. So, yeah, and meet up with her new friend.
And if you are in Auckland and you have a child who would like to be Lily's playmate, Carleen Hansen, you can find her on Neighbourly. Just Google or go to Neighbourly and you will find her. It's 4 minutes to 6. A controversial artwork in Auckland, which resembles the State House, will be unveiled to the public for the first time this weekend. Michael Parakowhai, the Lighthouse, is being opened to the public tomorrow night. Our reporter Tom Furley was taken on a tour of the two-storey sculpture and filed this report.
The two-storey weatherboard house sits on prime real estate on Queen's Wharf, commanding brilliant views of the Waitemata Harbour. However, other than the seagulls atop its roof, this house shall remain uninhabited. Funded by Barfoot and Thompson and other anonymous donors, it's a $1.5 million addition to the Auckland Council's art collection. Today, black card remains over the windows and a fence is yet to come down ahead of tomorrow's public opening. The Council's Manager of Arts and Culture, Kay Glamazina, took me for a tour of the finished piece.
As a sculpture, it's very much about looking through the work, so it's not like a painting where you look at a painting and you have the same experience. This house has been designed very much to look through, so when you look at what's inside, you'll see that you're peering through and you'll see people looking on the other side probably, but if you're looking from the south side, you'll also see the Waitemata.
The inside will remain closed to the public, but I was able to get a sneak peek of the space beyond its red front door.
Yes, so coming inside, you'll see that it's not an ordinary house. That what this house holds is lights representing the known universe, or the cosmos. So all of these lights are constellations of stars from the southern hemisphere. And then within that sits Captain James Cook.
The neon lights of different colours are scattered across the shining white walls and windows and reflect off every surface, including a highly polished Captain James Cook sculpture. The piece has been controversial, with some criticising the amount of money spent on a State House lookalike, given the issues around housing affordability and homelessness. Some people who fish from the wharf just a few metres away say the artwork is not welcomed.
It's an eyesore, mate. People are struggling on the streets and here they are building houses at the end of wharves where no one can live. Like, we've watched it come in, we watch when we're going to watch them open and it's a waste of time.
It's a bit of an eyesore.
Yeah, I don't know, it's supposed to be art, but to be honest, White Plonker State House here.
But others said it provided a nice contrast to the concrete jungle surrounding it. The chair of the advisory panel for Art in Public Places Auckland, Ross Liu, went through the house this morning and said he was impressed by what he saw. As for the controversy around housing, he said that was likely part of the intended meaning.
What is the role of art other than to provoke discussion and lead discussion and ask questions? I think there couldn't be a more appropriate symbol, actually, in terms of a comment on the climate and the struggles we have.
Kay Glamazina says people will have to see the finished piece before making up their minds.
People like to say controversial, but I'm not sure if it really is controversial. I never think it's a wise thing to judge any type of work before it's finished. You know, whether it's a rugby game or a piece of art, you don't make pass judgment on the game until the game's finished. So I say the same for art. Come and see the work, see what you think of it.
It's opening to the public tomorrow night if you want to make up your own mind. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
If you're wondering where it is, it's where the cloud is, which was that temporary structure, which of course is still there, that was part of the Rugby World Cup. So it's beyond. Kelvin just put up a picture as I was saying that without any warning. That's pretty impressive, Kelvin. So it's just beyond the cloud. And if you're wondering where the cloud is, if you're not from Auckland, it's essentially at the end of Queen Street, right down in the harbour, right beside where the ferries leave, at the very end of Queen Street. Katrina Batten, who knows Auckland better than me, has given me the nod. So that's where it is. Pips.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. A Golden Bay local says the stranding of about 400 pilot whales on Farewell Spit is the largest she's ever seen. More than 400 whales stranded overnight, and 300 of them were dead by this morning. Most of the remaining 100 refloated at high tide this morning, but all but 12 have re-beached. Bridie Griffiths from Golden Bay says she has been attending whale stranding since she was a child, and this is the biggest she's ever seen.
It's heartbreaking. It never gets easier to see. Beautiful big animals just dying left, right and centre.
Bridie Griffiths says the volunteers are trying to keep the whales that have re-stranded and those still at sea separated. Preparations are reported to be underway to tow a cruise liner adrift off the Victorian coast back to Melbourne. The Norwegian Star, which often plies the New Zealand-Australian cruise circuit, has about 2,000 passengers aboard. Tugs are racing to the scene of the incident. The cause is not known and details are still sketchy. Meanwhile, the second investigation this year has been launched into a luxury French cruise ship after it hit rocks in Milford Sound yesterday. The Transport Accident Investigation Commission says the L'Austral, which is about 160 metres long, has minor damage to its hull. Maya Burry reports.
The Commission's chief investigator, Tim Burfoot, says in January the ship hit rocks while transferring passengers on Snares Island and had to call into Bluff for repairs. Mr. Burfoot says it is concerning that the two incidents have happened so close together. He says 3 investigators will go aboard the L'Austral when it makes a scheduled call at Dunedin tomorrow. Mr. Burfoot says they will be going through the interview process and checking all of the navigation systems. This is Maya Burry.
A fishing vessel that struck rocks in Oamaru last night is still in the water almost a day after the crash. The Jane Marie ran aground at 9:30 near Holmes Wharf at the entrance to the harbour, with fears strong surf and high winds could break up the boat. The 2-person crew escaped uninjured. A salvage diver has been sent from Dunedin to locate the boat's fuel tanks after diesel was detected in the water. Otago Regional Council's on-scene commander, Scott McLean, says the diver will isolate the tanks to prevent further leaking. The US President Donald Trump is vowing to continue fighting to restore his travel ban after an appeals court in San Francisco refused to reinstate it. In an angry message on Twitter, the president said America's national security is at risk and the appeals court had made a political decision. Our Washington correspondent Simon Marks reports.
President Trump wasted no time responding to the massive blow dealt to him by the appeals court. On Twitter he wrote, "See you in court. The security of our nation is at stake." That's an indication a long legal road is now likely to take him to the US Supreme Court, the last stop on his travel ban's legal journey. But for now, confounded by the courts in the first month of his presidency, America's borders remain open. Simon Marks, RNZ News, Washington.
Labour's high-profile candidate Willie Jackson has spoken about his meeting with colleague Poto Williams, saying they had a positive conversation and are committed to working together. Ms Williams flew to Auckland on Wednesday night and visited Mr Jackson at Wātea Marae in Mangere. Earlier in the week, Ms Williams publicly criticised Mr Jackson after it was announced he would be a Labour candidate because of comments he made during the Roastbusters investigation into underage sex. Mr Jackson apologised again for any hurt, and yesterday Ms Williams also apologised to her party for the way she went about it.
Oh, that's her decision. I never advised Poto to do anything. All I wanted Poto to do is have a kōrero with me, and we did that. And those decisions are her decisions. But I reiterate, I think she's a good woman, principled woman, passionate woman, and I only wish her well.
Willie Jackson on his meeting with Poto Williams. A woman paid just $3 an hour to work as a support carer for the elderly is very pleased that the Supreme Court has taken the time to hear her case, in which she is seeking higher pay. In March 2015, the Employment Court ruled in favour of Janet Lowe, but that decision was later overturned by the Court of Appeal. Outside the Supreme Court today, Ms Lowe said the pay she received had not changed since she began working as a support carer 25 years ago.
It was $75 for 24 hours. They haven't changed it. It hasn't gone up because they call it an allowance, not a wage, because we're not workers, and whatever arguments, they're quite spurious.
Janet Lowe. The Health Ministry's lawyers told the Supreme Court the relief caregivers were not engaged by it or the local health board, but worked informally for those they cared for. It's 6:05. In sport, the World Anti-Doping Agency and Six Nations Rugby are demanding the laboratory in charge of All Black lock Patrick Tuipulotu's doping test explain the discrepancy in their results. Tuipulotu's sample tested positive for a specified substance after the All Blacks test against Ireland in November. He was provisionally suspended, but yesterday it was revealed his B sample was clean, clearing him of any wrongdoing. WADA and Six Nations Rugby say they will now investigate the matter with the Utah laboratory involved. The All Blacks coach Steve Hansen says his players are well aware of what they can and can't take.
They're asking questions of all the staff, and that's why this one was such a mystery to everybody. You know, like Patrick was 100% sure he hadn't taken anything wrong, but yeah, we had an A sample that said he had, and so, you know, again, you just got to let it work its way through and trust the people that are dealing with it and trust your athlete. Steve Hansen. The WBC heavyweight boxing champion Deontay Wilder has set his sights on New Zealand's WBO champion Joseph Parker. Wilder is set to defend his WBC title defence against Gerald Washington later this month, but is already talking about a unification bout with Parker. Wilder is predicting a win for Parker when he defends his title for the first time against mandatory challenger Hughie Fury in April. New Zealander Steven Adams has played a leading hand in helping Oklahoma City Thunder beat defending NBA basketball champions, the Cleveland Cavaliers, 118-109. Adams scored 20 points, took 13 rebounds, made 2 blocks, an assist and a steal as the Thunder dominated the second half. That's the news.
I'm taking this bloody car to end the cargo!
Hi, Lynn Freeman here, and on Standing Room Only, as pork pie blasts around the country, we preview the Mowers, the New Zealand Film Awards, and talk to the man who co-wrote the original Goodbye Pork Pie. The great Ian Mew is about to tread the boards himself for the first time in almost 2 decades. Plus, reaction to the official launch of artist Michael Parakofai's version of a state house, complete with chandeliers on Auckland's waterfront. Standing Room Only, Sunday afternoon on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Whanganui, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Mainly fine, but some cloudy periods and isolated afternoon showers today. And evening showers today. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine and cloudy periods, a few showers at times, especially inland. Manawatu to Wellington, also wide at upper, fine with variable high cloud. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury mainly fine with high cloud, but a few spots of rain today. Buller, Westland and Fiordland mostly cloudy. Occasional rain or showers clearing from Buller and northern Westland tonight. Otago and Southland cloudy periods today with a few showers, mainly fine tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands cloud increasing today, rain and southerly gales tomorrow. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint on John Campbell's birthday. Woohoo!
Thanks, Katrina Batten. Have a lovely weekend.
You too.
Do you reckon if we work together long enough we can just call each other by our first names?
Oh, I don't know about that.
No.
Maybe.
No, let's not get carried away.
Okay. Good on you, JC.
Thanks very much, KB. 6:08, you're with Checkpoint on Friday night. Let's return to Farewell Spit at the top of the South Island now, where rescuers have spent most of the day, as we know, trying to save as many whales as they can from a mass stranding of more than 400. Volunteers say they will stay there as late as possible tonight, trying to save the nearly 100 still alive. The tide is coming in. High tide is the time they try and get the whales back out. Zach Fleming has the latest.
Several hundred volunteers will stay at Farewell Spit until last light tonight, tending to the nearly 100 whales who have restranded themselves on the beach. The restrandings were a major setback for the Department of Conservation and Welfare Group Project Jonah's attempts to save the pod. Project Jonah's General Manager Darren Grover said the fate of the restranded whales will be clearer around 6 a.m. tomorrow.
We're overcast now, and out with the whales there's absolutely no cover, so it's blowing and it's cold. It feels like about 10 degrees out there. So we've got some hardy souls. We're paying close attention to people to make sure they don't exhaust themselves and get into any trouble, because we need healthy people to try and help these healthy whales back into the ocean.
Authorities were alerted that the pod might be in trouble around 8 p.m. last night, but by first light the beach was lined with carcasses. More than 75% of the whales were dead by the time rescuers arrived on site. Today's strandings marks the third largest whale stranding in New Zealand since the 1800s. 1,000 whales were stranded in the Chatham Islands in 1918 and 450 in Auckland in 1985. In February 2012, 70 pilot whales stranded on Farewell Spit, but they were successfully refloated.
That's Zach Fleming just filing on the latest. Ian Angus is DOC's head of marine species and threats. He's coordinating a team taking samples of the mammals to find out why so many of them have died so quickly. I asked Ian to explain the scale of what has happened.
It's one of the more significant ones that we've had. We've had bigger strandings back in 1918. On the Chatham Islands, we had around 1,000 animals. In 1985, we had 450 around Great Barrier Island, and then we had in 1991 about 345 animals in Tasman. So certainly, this is one of the most significant strandings we've had.
Gosh, so if I listen to what you were saying there, this is one of the sort of four biggest in the past century.
Yeah, it's certainly up there. I mean, mass strandings of pilot whales globally are quite a common occurrence. They're always unfortunate, but and we're certainly an area in which pilot whales frequent. So yes, we do get them. We do get pilot whales strandings fairly regularly.
Yes.
Very unfortunate, but we don't normally get this number of animals stranding.
Yes. Why do they do it?
It's one of those. It's sort of the million-dollar question. There's a lot of theories. It could be anything from a couple of ill animals that have swum. It could be, they've had a fright. It could be them trying to escape predators, or it could just be because Farewell Spit is somewhere where we have a slowly rising sort of incline into the beach. The animals just get lost, and before they know it, they find themselves in very shallow water. And because of the social bonds that they have between whales, they just follow the net one next to it, and before you know it, they're out of the depths and they're stranded, particularly the tide's going out. Farewell.
Yeah, in very large numbers. So they're sticking together, which in this case is entirely problematic, right? They're following the leader.
Yeah, no, it is. They've got incredibly strong bonds between individuals and among the group. And what we tend to find, even when you may try and successfully refloat an animal, it'll still stay in that vicinity because the bonds are so strong. And unfortunately, those strong bonds help in some situations, but they do lead to the problem of the mass stranding.
Yes, it's heartbreaking, isn't it? Because they actually, the rescuers, and these are just ordinary folk by and large, did a fantastic job of getting about 100 whales back out to sea, but they hung around and they've come back in again.
Yeah, so there are a lot of people out there, and it can be a really distressing and hard job. You're out there; it can get cold after a time. Particularly, it's very distressful being around a number of animals which you're trying to help. And then they are large animals, so they're not the easiest to move. So when you actually get them refloated, it's heartbreaking to then have a few or some then swim back or be too unwell to swim away. But my understanding at the moment is that they've refloated successfully, some not successfully, and then we're all going to wait for the next high tide and to see what's happened with, see what we do with those, and then to see what happens to those we have successfully refloated, and hopefully they're fine.
And in terms of the ones that have been lost, and there is a large number of whales that have died now, there is, and I know you're not glib or opportunistic about this, but it does present you with a research opportunity, doesn't it?
Yes, it's one of those unfortunate circumstances that we have. We're caught in a quandary with marine mammals. We know a lot about many of them, but we don't know everything. And so, when an opportunity, let's call it that. I use that in the worst.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
It provides us an opportunity to go out, examine the whales, and to learn some new facts about them. We know pilot whales relatively well in terms of their biology, behaviour, and stuff. But what we'll be seeking to do in this occasion is that we will work with some vet pathologists from Massey University and other university researchers, and we'll undertake what we call a necropsy on the whale, which basically is an assessment, and it can be both external and internal assessment about the general health and well-being of the whales. And what we're trying to do is trying to get some biology, some basic biology answered, some questions answered, but also in some instances look to see if we can determine what might have been the cause of the stranding and what might have led to the death of the whales.
So you're able to do research detailed enough to identify if the whales all had something in common that had gone wrong?
Well, it's unfortunately it's not like CSI. What we normally get is sort of hints or indications. So, we will do, first of all, obviously a visual inspection to see if there's any trauma or injuries on the whales. I think that's sort of unlikely as a cause of death. But then we'll also start to look at, through the necropsy, look at various organs to see if there might have been, an infection, something toxic in their systems, something, some other cause of the stranding, but also that led to the death of the whales. Because I think what's struck us as unusual about the stranding is, one, the number, but also we've had a large number of whales pass away or die very quickly, and that's fairly unusual. In my recollection, I can't recall that we've had so many whales pass away so quickly. But there might be reasons. We might not have got to the stranding early enough in terms of detecting it. It might not have been reported, reported late, and so the time period between them stranding and these deaths might actually be longer than we'd previously thought.
It's Ian Angus, DOC's Marine Species and Threats Manager, talking about this extraordinary stranding down at Farewell Spit, or up in Farewell Spit if you live elsewhere in the South Island. It's a big hit for his presidency, but President Donald Trump remains defiant. See you in court, he tweeted. Having just lost in court, a federal appeals court has turned down his attempt to revive his controversial travel ban on people from 7 majority Muslim countries. It will remain suspended, on hold, not in effect. Elizabeth Brown reports.
The 3-judge panel was unanimous in its decision that it wasn't convinced the Justice Department had provided enough evidence to overturn a ruling by a judge in Seattle, which last week suspended parts of the president's executive order. This is how Mr. Trump took the news.
It's a political decision, and we're going to see them in court, and I look forward to doing it.
So you believe the judges made a political decision?
We have a situation where the security of our country is at stake. And it's a very, very serious situation. So we look forward, as I just said, to seeing them in court.
So okay. Thanks, do you think this has undercut the early days of your presidency? This is such a core issue.
This is just a decision that came down, but we're going to win the case.
And have you conferred with your new Attorney General on this tonight? Is he a part of it now?
No, I haven't. We just heard the decision.
How did you find out about the decision, Mr. President?
Just saw it. We just saw it just like you did.
Via the news, et cetera, the media.
But it's a decision that we'll win, in my opinion, very easily.
And his senior advisor, Kellyanne Conway, backed that up when she was asked about the decision by reporters on her way to the White House.
Does he see this as a setback?
He sees it as what he's always seen it as, which is the statute provides a president, in this case President Trump, with great latitude and authority to protect the citizens and protect the nation's national security. This was not argued on the merits. Now that we'll have an opportunity to argue on the merits, we look forward to doing that. We look forward to prevailing. I think his tweet was perfect when he said, "We'll see you in court."
The appeals court gave the Trump administration a sharp message, saying the government had taken a position that the judiciary could not review its decisions, and that was wrong. The judges also said the states of Washington and Minnesota, which were arguing in favour of the continued suspension of the ban, offered enough evidence that reinstating it would cause harm. Those states had said it damaged individuals, businesses and universities. The Attorney General for Washington, Bob Ferguson, said today's ruling is very significant.
Constitutional provisions at stake are fundamental to who we are as a people. When an executive order is adopted like this, with little thought, little planning, little oversight, that creates chaos throughout our country, that has a real impact on people's lives here and abroad. Real impacts.
Bob Ferguson was also pretty quick to respond to Mr. Trump's "We'll see you in court" tweet, tweeting back, "We've seen you in court twice." The US Justice Department is now reviewing today's decision and has not yet said what its next step will be, although it's widely expected the fate of President Trump's travel ban will end up in the Supreme Court. For Checkpoint, Elizabeth Brown.
Really fascinating, all of this. I was reading about it in the LA Times and there was an article there. How would the Supreme Court react to Trump over the travel ban? Not well, say legal experts. One of the legal experts they quoted was Jessica Levinson, a law professor at Loyola Law School in LA. We went to her Twitter account. Lo and behold, she is also Jessica, who is waiting on the line now, a professor in law and president of the LA Ethics Commission. And so we contacted Jessica, and even though it's very late in California, Jessica, you're there joining us live from LA. Thank you for being with us in New Zealand. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Is it a pleasure to talk about this stuff, or are you just banging your head against solid objects, those of you who love and understand the law in the United States?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's hugely depressing. Every day there's a new piece of information that is kind of crushing in a sense. But I think today really was vindicating in the sense that we have three judges who were appointed by presidents of different political affiliations, and they all came to the same conclusion. And what we saw is the judicial system, frankly, working. And what we saw is the American form of government working. We have a tripart government. We have a system of checks and balances. We have three co-equal branches. And the judicial system did exactly what it's supposed to do. It reviewed an executive action, and it said, we need to push pause on that executive action because we have to have a full trial on the merits, and this executive order is not going to be in effect while we're fleshing out these really important constitutional and statutory issues.
There's so much to discuss, but I want to discuss the checks and balances in the three co-equal branches. Is it remotely possible that President Trump doesn't understand this? Or is he up to something else? Is this simply politics? Is he simply playing to his constituency disingenuously, with no hope whatsoever, really, of winning in the courts?
Well, I don't know what is in President Trump's mind, but I will say that candidate Trump and President Trump have been very consistent in trying to undermine the legitimacy of our judicial branch. And we saw this just last week, or maybe it was early this week, where President Trump called the federal judge who was appointed by a Republican, George W. Bush, who was unanimously confirmed by the U.S. Senate, and he called this judge a so-called judge. He's also questioned the ability of judges, depending on their family heritage, to do their jobs. So what we see here really is a campaign by our president against the integrity of the judicial branch, and I think that's very dangerous. I think that it is playing to his base in some ways, but I think that what we have is we see a president trying to kind of push the boundaries of executive power, and the judiciary said, united in one voice, there are limits on the executive. Even when you're making decisions that are based on immigration and national security, you still can't contravene the Constitution of the United States.
Okay, so they say that to the president. He tweets in capital letters, "See you in court," which means the Supreme Court. And that was the question the LA Times was discussing with you and other US legal experts. How do you think his case will go in the Supreme Court?
Well, not well, as I said to the LA Times. So what we have here is just in this particular suit, we have so far 4 federal judges, the trial court judge, and then these 3 appellate court judges who have all said, yes, we need to at least stop the implementation of this executive order about immigration. Now, President Trump will be appealing to an 8-member Supreme Court. As you know, typically we have 9 members. He just nominated someone to be part of the court, except that nomination hasn't the person has not yet gotten onto the bench. And what will happen is if the court is divided, then the decision that came out today, the lower court decision, is the decision that will stand. If the court is not divided, which I actually think is what will happen, I believe that if you read the detailed and thorough and very thoughtful decision that came out today, that the Supreme Court will actually again rule in favor of the states of Washington and Minnesota and against the federal government.
This is fascinating, isn't it? And if we look at the nominee, Neil Gorsuch, right, he is a Republican nominee and regarded as reliably Republican in his politics. But that doesn't usurp, does it? I mean, everyone knows that American judicial appointments are partisan, except surely when it comes to applying the law in such important cases. And what we've seen in the unanimous decision, 2 Democrat appointments, 1 Republican appointment, is that there was no partisanship in their decision. There is an expectation, surely, that the Supreme Court are going to be better than divided along party lines.
Well, I certainly hope so. I think one of the most difficult moments for the Supreme Court, as your listeners may remember, was in 2000 when they voted along party lines in the case that really ended up deciding the 2000 presidential election, the Bush versus Gore case. I would hope, as you said, Neil Gorsuch is a Republican. He's a conservative scholar. But these are questions that should transcend partisan ideology, and they shouldn't be related to what is your voter registration. These are questions that should ask deeper legal questions about what is the proper theory of how much power the president has. When does the Equal Protection Clause say you can't discriminate against people because of their religion? And I don't think that it is at all guaranteed that Neil Gorsuch, when he gets onto the Supreme Court, would rule in favor of Donald Trump simply because Donald Trump appointed him. This is the whole reason that we have lifetime appointments for federal judges. They don't have to continue to run for election to keep their jobs because we say, once you become a judge, you should be above politics. You should not have to make your decisions based on what you think is popular, based on what politicians want, based on what you think the public wants. You should apply the facts to the law. And my hope is that the Supreme Court will do that. And my hope is that it will not fall along predictable party lines.
Professor Jessica Levinson from the Loyola Law School, who is also president of the LA Ethics Commission. Thank you so much for joining us, Jessica. We really appreciate your time. We should also say it's Friday night in New Zealand, so we can now officially declare it your weekend. It's 6:26. It is the world's largest refugee camp, housing more than 250,000 people. The Dadaab camp on the Kenyan-Somali border was due to be shut by Kenyan authorities and its residents sent back to war-torn Somalia. But a Kenyan court has now upheld a challenge to the closure by the country's National Commission on Human Rights. This report from the BBC.
For a quarter of a century, Dadaab refugee camp has sprawled as far as the eye can see across Kenya's eastern desert. At the height of Somalia's civil war and famine, it was home to 500,000 people. There are still at least 270,000 living behind thorn scrub fences under basic tarpaulin shelters. The refugees here can't build permanent structures, can't work, and rely on handouts to survive. But at least there's basic healthcare and schools, something Somalia still can't offer. The Kenyan government's announcement it would close the camp did push some to return, mostly out of fear. They now live in worse conditions. International aid organisations opposed the move and were delighted with the High Court ruling that closing the camp is against Kenya's constitution. Lisbeth Albrecht from Médecins Sans Frontières said they warned the government not to close Dadaab.
That could have put the lives of thousands of refugees at stake. We expressed our concern, especially for the most vulnerable populations, stating that the basic services in some parts of Somalia are definitely not prepared yet.
The government says it will appeal against the court's decision. Few believe keeping refugees for 25 years in a huge desert camp is right, but alternatives take time and a different approach. Neighbouring Uganda has welcomed well over 1 million refugees, but lends each family a plot of land to grow food, to eat and sell, and gives them the right to work. With a bad drought and famine warnings in Somalia, Dadaab may once again become a place of last resort.
That report from the BBC at Dadaab, the refugee camp, the world's largest refugee camp. It is housing more than 250,000 people. We're coming up to the end of Checkpoint tonight. We've been throwing things in and out today, so our durations are a little bit under. So I'm going to tell you about Project Jonah and what is happening. They are working at Farewell Spit. The high tide is at about 8:30 tonight, so people are going to try and get surviving whales back out to sea. Two things are happening. One, the surviving whales that are going back out to sea are turning around, it seems, and coming back in. Secondly, there is another pod that are trying to approach the shore. If you want to know whether volunteers will be required tomorrow on Farewell Spit, so if you are somewhere in that area, and it's a wee way away from anywhere, please go to the Project Jonah website. They are updating their requirements as they go along. Project Jonah on Facebook. We should say, though, that conditions can be quite cold there. So if you have a wetsuit, that would be extremely helpful. Lots of people saying really lovely things tonight. Thank you all. I do want to say we work with a fantastic team. Here, Kelvin, is a shot of Kelvin and Rangi and Pip sitting in the control room. And we could go out, although they'll be boozing. Can we go out to the office? Can we go out? Can we have a quick shot of the office? Oh, no, we don't have time. We don't have, it's because they're boozing in the office. On behalf of our fantastic team, thank you so much for being with us and have a great weekend.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Department of Conservation says no attempt will be made to refloat whales stranded at Farewell Spit until tomorrow for safety reasons. President Trump has vowed to keep fighting for his travel ban after a United States appeals court rejected it. Large parts of Australia are suffering a 3-day heatwave amid warnings of electricity blackouts, bushfires and extreme temperatures. And preparations are reported to be underway to tow a cruise liner adrift off the Victorian coast back to Melbourne. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Country life, why live it?
Generally the lifestyle and what it brings, and it brings out the Kiwi and New Zealanders. Part of our ancestry and it's a part of our development as a country. It's beautiful.
I guess I just like freedom, the free space, fresh air.
Peace and quiet, and when we raised our kids they couldn't disappear down the street and be gone. They could go about a K up the road and